Hi, everybody. Today is August 28, 2024, and I'm honored to have with me the illustrious, brilliant, formidable Professor Dr. Michaéla Schippers. Tell us, Michaéla, what is, where you are, what have you been up to, what are you thinking about, and I guess I'll give a little preview. Are we in a death spiral?
Yes, that's the positive news. I'm Michaéla Schippers. I'm professor at the Rotterdam School of Management. And I've been working on positive psychology for a couple of years, but at the same time, since 2020, I got more into the idea that things weren't really great with our society. And then I found out we might even be in a death spiral, which is basically like that we are running around like ants and that we can't get out of the spiral anymore, like the ant mill effect. So I came up with the death spiral effect together with Ioannidis and Matthias Luijks, and we wrote it down and published it, and got it published in Frontiers in Psychology. It is in Frontiers in Sociology. It's published a while ago.
So here it is.
Yes.
So is society caught up? So I guess the first question would be, I suppose you somewhat defined it. What were your symptoms and signs that prompted you to write this, as opposed to, lovely, lightly spiral?
Yeah, so the main thing that we see as a death spiral, I called it markers of societal decline. And so there are several markers, and one very important one is that you see increased inequalities. So that there's a lot of difference between people who have a lot of money and people who don't have any money. But in the most extreme case, that is basically access to food. And we have seen that since 2020, hunger has doubled in the world. There's only a few people who know that. If I ask people, do you know that the hunger has doubled since 2020? We had a big gathering in our school about the SDGs, and people were talking, we're not doing a great job on the SDGs. And so I raised my hand and I said, well, we're not doing not a great job. It's like if we didn't touch it, it would be like the same, maybe, or maybe a little bit worse. But now we have doubled this. So how are we going to, what are we going to do about this as human beings, as people in a society where we state that we don't want this?
So my kind of short-term memory loss. What was it that happened in 2020? Was it did the Netherlands lose the World Cup? What brought the world to such a climate state? It was Eurovision finals. I can't remember what that was. What happened in 2020?
In 2020, there was a COVID-19 crisis. At least it was said there is a COVID-19 crisis. We have to do a lot. And so what you see is that a government started acting. Okay, you can act and bring about positive change, but in this case, I think they acted and brought about negative change in the sense that a lot of lives are being lost. It's not only hunger, it's also, so for instance, during the COVID-19 crisis, 365 million kids are dependent on school meals. So not only didn't they get schooling, they didn't get school meals, and they were left at home, sometimes with abusive parents. Sometimes school is the only place where people are maybe a little bit safer than at home. So, and we know that this is also hurting a whole generation, but it can also last a lifetime. There's a very early report that the loss, the learning loss and the hurt can last a lifetime in terms of not going to school. And that's only for a couple of weeks. We estimated it after a couple of weeks. I wrote a paper that's called For the Greater Good, Devastating Side Effects of the COVID-19 Crisis. And then I already listed like a host of effects, like a whole table with these 365 million people, kids not getting school meals, physical effects, mental effects. So all these were not only predicted, but also already happening in 2020, in June 2020, when I started publishing about this.
Well, maybe you can define what is groupthink, but maybe you can touch on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, it's basically groupthink on a very big scale. So you can do it. You have well, groupthink as a individual is hard, but with 2 people, with 3 people, with 4 people, you can start to have the idea that you have to really think the same, so and to concur in your opinions with each other. So a groupthink is basically that you have the idea that you all have to be in the same boat, you have to think alike, and only then. So there's a very pressure on consensus. And you see that also since 2020. Then they say, yeah, all the researchers do. There's consensus among researchers. 97% of the researchers agree on this. So how do you know that to begin with? So there is a lot of groupthink that you see in society, but there's also a lot of, and that is usually a bias that happens, but also there's a lot of explicit pressure to think alike and to be in the same boat and to not have a different opinion. And that is also a very important marker of societal decline. It's basically scientific freedom, but also freedom of thought, freedom of speech. If these disappear, then yeah, you're in a bad state. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Preemptive overreaction shows that one is taking forceful and decisive action against a perceived threat that may never materialize, and so forth. Anyway, that's that sounds a little bit like what we had there, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. True. That's definitely what we saw. Yeah, and
so,
still seeing it, because it's not over in a sense that it seems like since then freedoms have become even less. So because there were still a lot of constitutional rights, it also seems that now the law is being changed to follow the more authoritarian ideas. If you look at the UK, people can get arrested for posting ideas on Facebook or on other social media. It's made easier to do that even.
I'm going to ask you a question, getting back to kind of talk about poverty. I mean, it's not just kind of impoverishment of the mind and the soul, but there's actually was literal poverty, through a lot of places that were kind of clawing out of, previous more severe poverty, West Africa and whatnot, when trade got shut down, travel got shut down. What are your thoughts and experiences about how the world kind of took a body blow for this, say, irrationality, and how has it been unfolding? Have you kind of kept up with the kind of economic indices of places outside Europe?
I know that, for instance, in West Africa, hunger has quadrupled even. So I'm looking at the most extreme forms of poverty, but you see it basically everywhere. The economies have taken a blow, but also the mental health of people. So there is a huge range of effects, and it's so much. It's like people can't even oversee it. So I try to make lists of it and try to put it in models. What exactly is happening? So for me, I'm not keeping up like with the news all the time, because it's very depressing to do that. And I know it's happening already. I knew it was coming when I was writing it, because I predicted it more or less in my models, in my ideas, in my figures that I had. For instance, I have this figure of the death spiral effects and how it works. Basically, there is a crisis that can be man-made or an unfortunate incident. But then initially we ignore it or deny it, but then we start to overreact, or governments start to overreact, and they have this myopic, single-minded focus on one set of outcomes. So let's have, for instance, the zero COVID. I just wrote Ioannidis wrote a paper, and he asked me as a co-author about that. They were still advocating for zero COVID in 2022. So it was not even like we didn't know about this. No, let's still go for it. Or it was the end of 2021. I don't know exactly the exact date, but we wrote a paper about this. Like, how can you come up with a group of people and experts that you sample in this way? So, and then what we see, and that's really interesting, is that not only governments start to behave like in a certain way, you can say it's Machiavellianism, they try to, put a power base, but people below that also start to behave in a very dysfunctional way. So the whole society becomes dysfunctional in a way, because basically it's easy. you say, okay, we don't want this because this is what's happening here. People, the hunger is doubling. If you ask people, is this something you would like to have for a new society? They would all say no. But then when it happens, they don't know what to do. They say, I don't know exactly what we can do about this. Well, the only thing is not condone it. If you go along with it or obey orders that are definitely not in your best interest and not in the best interest of people in general, then the whole situation starts to worsen and there is a destabilization of social order in general. And then the next step is that the whole population is in a survival mode. So basically we are entering this antmill and we can't get out of it anymore. People don't know how to get out of it because in the shops I talk to people, can we do something about it? Should we do something about it? And then they say, I have no idea what to do. Well, the only thing, not to actively go along, it's hard, I know, but that would be a first step. So then I made this model. Okay, then we are a society in decline. We have loss of freedom. We have loss of prosperity and initiative. So people don't take any initiative. So it's only, it's like a couple of words, but it's a lot of theory behind it. And then you start to see increased mortality and people start to hang on to what they still have. So I have a person who is a photographer in my hometown, and I talked to him after the crisis, and he aged in my view 10 years in those 2 years. After 2 years I spoke with him, and he said he lost like 80,000 euros, which is cost him to sell his house, and yeah, he almost lost his business, but he's still in business. But 1,000 is not, it's a lot for a one-person business. So yeah, what can we do? We have to try to break this downward spiral, because if we don't do anything, it will go down the drain, let's say. Then there is societal demise. So if we don't do that, then low quality decision making is propagated. So the government, there's government overreach, and probably also institutionalized dispossession, in the sense that the government will say, well, we need your house, we need your, I don't know, whatever you have. It's no longer yours anymore because we need it for the greater good. We already see some changes in laws also in the Netherlands that in theory they can say, hey, we need your house because we need people from abroad to live in your house. And so where am I going to live? Well, that's I don't know. Yeah, I think, and then you have this triangle of death, war, famine, and pandemics that have been, other people have been also commenting on this. For instance, Michael Jan, who is a former Green Beret, he also said this is the triangle of death. And so what can we do? So I didn't want to leave it at this negative message, basically. I said, well, let's go for a positive change and make a conscious and deliberate attempt to break this downward spiral. So, and then we can go to the positive effect. That might be a good idea to do that. To the positive figure 2, I think it is.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Sorry?
Hold on. Yeah, let me get to it.
That's figure 3, actually.
Yeah.
If you look at it in 4 quadrants, if you have a society in development, for instance, after World War II, you've seen an upward spiral, basically increasing ease of collaboration between groups and nations, stabilizing society, building up of social institutions. So that was, I thought, that's a society in development. It's not stable yet, but it's developing in a positive way towards a positive society. And so I thought in phase 2, we start to see already a little bit of decline. You see a lot of sociologists, they say that the seeds of decline are often already built in a society. So I've also mentioned the Roman Empire, of course, as one of the examples, which you see, for instance, just before it collapses, there's a huge increase in inequalities. You can, even if you look at the difference in income before and 200 years later, just before the collapse. And then you see that, you have functioning social institutions, societal problems are being addressed, and you have a relative stable society, but you already see the seeds of decline in rising inequalities. And also trust in social institutions goes down in a certain period of time. In 2020, you see a huge decrease in trust in social institutions. So if you go to phase 3, then you see that, you start to see a more dysfunctional society, extreme inequalities. Now, well, I've written a couple of papers also on aggressive measures, also with John Ioannidis, on how this becomes extremely unequal, and these societal problems increase. You see that countries where there are a lot of inequalities, they also have a lot of societal problems. And then you start to see dysfunctionalities. And in phase 4, of course, you get a declining or collapsing society, and then you get this triangle of debt again, which I also mentioned in the bigger figure, which is basically a collapsing society in the sense that everybody tries to survive somehow, and that's an extreme survival mode. If you're in a war, famine, and pandemics, why it's called triangle of death, because these three go together. Michael Jon told me, I spoke with him also, told me he read like a dozen of books on countries where this happens, and then you can see the patterns of how it happens. So the whole fabric of society is torn, and it's not really functional. But still, I think we need to break that downward spiral, because when I mentioned in my class, I mentioned learned helplessness. So a lot of students kind of latched onto that. And after the class, people came to me and I said, this is exactly what I feel. So that it cannot influence it, basically. That's also even more important than losing hope. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the end mail is basically the same as the death spiral effect. It's basically an end mail effect, where people or groups get stuck in a behavioral mode that leads to repeated bad decision making, which may result in the collapse of society. So it's the same. I just thought I couldn't choose between death spiral effect and end mail effect. It's basically the same. But then you can ask, especially Matthias W, a colleague from Ghent University. He's talking a lot about mass formation. So how does it relate? Well, this is also the mass is behaving like a swarm or a group of molecules. But that's because people are in an altered psychological state. And the end result is a totalitarian mindset where deviation of the main narrative is not accepted. So it is similar. So these are similar effects, but it's not exactly the same. So and then groupthink, we already spoke a little bit about that. And this is a mode of thinking where you only have to accept the viewpoint. So it's a bit more narrow. So they have to think of the group consensus is really important, and independent of what individuals think. Groupthink is a really strong effect that you do see during this whole period, a lot. And there is also my colleague Joffe, Arie Joffe, he wrote a paper about that also, about how groupthink is in this. And I also had it in some earlier models already mentioned. And let's see, which one is this? I can't see it. Oh yeah, the Abilene paradox. So that is that they take different. So that's what you see with the SDGs. Basically, we want one thing, but we do the other thing, and it's a kind of a self-defeating process. So they defeat the very purposes they are trying to achieve. So they want zero hunger, they want to end poverty, but it's been increased a lot. So you could say that this is also, in a sense, a very big paradox. So the next one, I can see here. Oh, group polarization. Yeah, that's the tendency of a group to make the decisions that are more extreme than the initial inclinations of its members. So if you talk about it and you decide together, then sometimes you take very risky decisions. So you can also see that in a sense that that we just go in full. Let's say, let's lock people up in their houses instead of. There were three ideas, at least in the Netherlands, and the first idea was very close to, well, let's say common sense and also what expert would advise if they weren't, let's say, pressured a lot. They would say more like in the Barrington Declaration, let's be careful, stay at home when you're sick, and if you're older, then be more careful. But keep society open. But now we kind of made a very risky decision to close schools, close businesses, and these had all these negative side effects. So you could say this is a huge, a huge thing. So all these things do play a role, but it's not exactly the same as a dead spiral effect.
The Great Barrington Declaration was certainly, folks protection in general, was certainly a huge improvement on what we had going. So
yeah, can I just briefly comment on that? Because I also wrote a paper on how governments could optimize their decision making in COVID-19 by using reflexivity. Because if you see what they said the dead number would be and what it actual was, there was like, I don't know, 400. There was such an increase. So I've been trying to correct all the figures, like I had to read them 3 times because I couldn't believe there was such a difference between the prediction and the actual outcome.
You're talking about like the Imperial College estimation with the guy Neil Ferguson, not our Niall Ferguson, but Neil Ferguson, in the UK. That guy, is that the one?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's crazy. And he was the one who I guess got caught. He got caught and got caught out. Kind of disobeying all the things that he was partying without mask. He's treating it.
That was in the Netherlands the same actually for politicians.
Yeah.
So there was a politician in the Netherlands who had a marriage, and he was doing everything they forbid for the regular people to do.
There's kind of this gaslighting aspect that I think contributes to the death spiral. That otherwise I think people would be able to get out of it.
Yeah, what I also find really interesting was in my village. I live in a historical village in the Netherlands, which is really beautiful. And in the winter, during the lockdown, there was ice. It was freezing, and we have like this former inner sea, which is now a huge lake, and it gets frozen over once every couple of years, let's say once every 5 years or something. And then people have this 100-year-old tradition that they go ice sailing. And they have these special boats that are beautiful, sometimes 100 years old, on which they can do ice sailing. And so it was freezing over, and people started to ice sail. And then the police came, and other people, came and said, "You're not allowed to do this." And we were not allowed. They were not allowed to party and everything. And then they just, there were like hundreds of people, and there were like 5 policemen, so they were totally ignored. But then I'm like, why do you don't let let anyone take away your party, but you do take your livelihood? Is that more important than just these nice?
I don't know. Why is leadership important to reversing a death spiral? I mean, do we have leadership? Is anybody aware of this, for instance?
Well, depends on your definition of leadership, but there are different kind of leaders, and the leader that I mentioned here is actually a leader that really wants to make a difference, and also is not about him. It's about making a real change, like Mandela. And personally, I think Mandela did a good job, but he never finished the job. I've been to South Africa, and I've seen more or less seen how it's now, how the state is now, and he did a good job in not playing a blame game. And do we need leaders? not necessarily. I think leadership in general is overrated. But if we can have somebody taking the lead in turning things around, so that's why it's pretty new term actually, turnaround leadership. But I think it's needed in this period of time. And this leader also needs to have this determination to break the negative spiral. And what kind of leaders do we have now? We have people who want to be in office, who want to be recognized, want to have all the things that are really good. We do have some leaders, I think, or some people that are really interested in the good for society, but these often do not reach the highest level and do not get to say a lot. So I think as a society, we need to say that we want those leaders. So and in general then also, but that's a little different story. I don't think the democracy that we have right now is the best way to organize this. So I would say a form of direct democracy, even if you look from the literature, if you look from a scientific standpoint, then people who live in countries where there is a relatively more direct democracy are happier, and also that it's better for people to have a say in things. So representative democracy is not the best way, I think.
Yeah, well, it's having this kind of fluidity of societies with, say, open borders or facilities that are, leads to a society in flux and leads to stresses and so forth. People think diversity is a strength, and it is in some ways, but going from A to B is really tricky, and there's a lot of fissures and fractions and factions that can fight each other. But I want to get back to your. You're welcome to comment to my comment, but I'd kind of like to add figure 3 if you wanted to. Your choice.
Yeah, and very important is smaller groups indeed on. Also decision making, let's say local, and also, but of course I think people should decide together what kind of decision making process they want. But let's go to the model indeed. So open-mindedness, openness to change is really important. So we have to say, okay, we want to do this differently. What are we going to do? Then, as I said, turnaround leadership and the determination to break this spiral. But then you need a reflection on the current situation and an assessment of the unwanted and a desired situation, which is something I developed. It's called Letters to the Future. And in Letters to the Future, you can write as a person, or you can do this as a group, but you can think about what your ideal world looks like. So you think about what will the world look like if we go on like this, and what do I want the world to look like if I were God for a day or a year, I don't know, for some time. And then in the second part, so there's more questions than just those two, but in the second part I can write about what am I going to contribute as a person. So I do this with my students. I did this last year in the course, and students really like it because they want to think what they want to do, and then it's very structured in a very structured way, and then you can break this negative spiral together. So then, if people have assessed this situation, the desired situation, then you can develop a strategy. So people will start to act right away instead of develop this strategy. Then I think you should restore trust, because trust in government, trust in institutions is historically low, at least in the Netherlands. I don't know how it's in the States, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty widespread. So as I said, Truth and Reconciliation Committee is better than going for blame game, and people are talking about tribunals and all these things. And we did this after World War II, but it didn't really work. I think probably not the right people or the wrong people might have been convicted, or sometimes the people who did a lot of wrongs, but it didn't help in any way, I think. So avoidance of this blame game is really important, because people will also try to evade this whole process, of course. So involving society members, as I said, a form of direct democracy. is, so I say deliberately a form, because it's not me deciding what kind of form this should take. I think together as people, it's a very difficult process. And it sounds easier to just have a leader and this person is going to say what needs to happen, but involving society members is crucial, I think. So enhancing personal autonomy, that is the counter effect of all this people thinking, I don't have any say in this, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to change this. So this learned helplessness, you enhance personal autonomy and energy. So also people feel more energized. As you said, you had this even about the dog, this prospect of you coming home or your wife coming home was really positive already. Positive ripple effects. It is so if people start to feel happy and feel better, this has a positive ripple effect on society, and this also ensures more high quality decision making. So that's basically, and then you can go reverse this downward spiral. So social inequalities will be decreased. You will have societal resilience. And of course, this is not something that happens automatically. So I talk in the paper a little bit more how this can happen and how this is already being done by some companies and by some organizations. Because a lot of organizations are just there to keep up the money, please fund us and then we do something. So, and very important, reinstating democracy, because I'm not sure we live in a democracy anymore at this point in time. So this will be the next part is free and open and equal society where people can thrive and prosper. But this also depends on the level and the quality of the democracy that we manage to build and manage to make. And some people say, well, this is really, really easy and it's nice. It's a nice model, but how are we going to do this? Well, maybe start with Letters to the Future. What I also did is I started the Great Citizens Movement, where I say, okay, let's do this as a society. So the idea is that this is kind of an umbrella movement where people really want to have change and positive change. And so there are already a lot of organizations who do that. So I thought, well, maybe there's this umbrella organization. Let's try to do this together. So I basically what I did is I co-wrote a new declaration, the Great Citizens Declaration, where we ask for positive interventions, positive psychology, but also I said, well, we had, of course, the Declaration of Independence, and it's being ignored a little bit. I read the declaration, but I also read the Dutch, basically Declaration of Independence, a very old one, and the Declaration of Independence, the Akte van Verlatingen, that is the basis for the Declaration of Independence. And I read that one too. And it's really interesting to read that it, for instance, says, and that in that time you had a king, and it was the war against, the Spanish war against the King of Spain, the 80-year war. And then they said, well, if a king is not good for its people, we have a moral duty to abandon this king. So it didn't say you have a right to abandon this king. No, we have a moral duty to abandon this king. So this was really interesting to me. So if we do that at this time, if politicians are not good for people, we have a moral duty maybe to abandon them. So that was my question and my idea. So that's something we can do, and everybody can start today, basically. And I would also call upon people to start today. Write your own letter to the future. If you agree, sign the declaration and start changing things, even if it's only in your environment. That's my idea.
You're dealing with kind of income inequality and gender issues and so forth. I was wondering, any kind of thoughts for us on that?
Yeah, actually, what I did with my students was I gave them an intervention, which was which was about goal setting, and it's later I developed a life crafting intervention, which was inspired on that one, and it was the goal setting was about try to think about the ideal life that you want to lead, and what are your goals if you want to do this, and what is the worst life that you can imagine. And then we found out that it really helped decrease inequalities. So students started to better. They did 22% better after writing this 4-hour intervention. And that was published in a different paper. But in this paper, we found that the gender and ethnicity gap almost disappeared. So the gender gap, so we had a huge difference between male and females in our schools. Male students did worse than female students, and that disappeared 98%. And the ethnicity gap disappeared 92%, but it took 2 years to almost disappear. But this was a bigger gap even. And that was really inspired me to go on with this line of research. And I talked to Jordan about this, and he was then still professor at Toronto. He's now emeritus professor. And we spoke a little bit about it. And then I showed him the results, and he said, well, that's great. Let's write it down. So I wrote it down. He's more into personality. So he kept talking about, let's write a little bit about personality in this paper, but we didn't measure it in that sense in this specific paper. And he visited a couple of times Rotterdam School of Management. And after that, recently I met him in Amsterdam because he was doing a show and the students wanted to invite him to our university, which in the end didn't work out. The university said they didn't have a lecture hall available. But then I emailed him again, and he invited me immediately with my whole team to come and visit his show in Amsterdam. And we talked a little bit backstage. He even invited me for dinner. Which was really nice because we talked about the current times, and I talked about the debt spiral effect with him. And I was just thinking about the whole concept at that time. I didn't write it down yet. And Michael Jon was also at that dinner, so it was really nice to see a couple of people and talk with them. Yes, if you want to do Ikigai TV.nl. If you look on ikigaitv.nl and the challenges, you see the Letters to the Future challenge. Please do the Letters to the Future and do sign the Great Citizens Declaration if you want to. It's not about my self-promotion, to be honest, because it's not about me. It's about that the world is making a turn for the better. So I think especially we shouldn't have gurus. We should have people should be their own guide and their own guru. And of course you can have inspiration from people, but not take your leaders too seriously.
All right. So I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much, Michaéla, for being
You're welcome.
here. All right. And thank you so much for bringing some incredible concepts to life.
So thank you. I'll just have to mute my phone. Sorry about that. Thanks for inviting me, and it was really nice to be here again and to talk about the debt spiral effect and the way to reverse it. So let's reverse it together, because we are with 8 billion people. We should be able to reverse it.
We have more like you. All right, thank you.